There's an oh so sad love story where a man falls in love, his lover dies, he goes to the underworld to find her, looks back, and loses her forever. But for What Dreams May Come, the movie, this tale gets flipped on its head, and now it's all about the underworld, or the afterlife. After all, even in the movie they say it, sometimes when you lose, you win. Welcome to A Tale Oft Told. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into a film that perhaps you haven't watched in a while. But before we do that, I have to ask, are you familiar with the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice? If not, you can check it out on our first inaugural episode, where it's told by yours truly. You can also read it on our website, taleofttold.com. If you want to just discover the myth for yourself, well, it's a Greek love tragedy. You can find it in a book on Greek myths, or you can just do a search of it on Google. It's not hard to find. On another note, it wouldn't hurt to also watch our featured movie, What Dreams May Come, before you start this podcast. And if you haven't, well, there will be spoilers. Trigger alert, this movie does dive deep into the topic of grief and loss and even suicide. So let's talk about What Dreams May Come, directed by Vincent Ward, based off of a novel written in 1978 by the late, great Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson, as a writer, was no stranger to the Orpheus and Eurydice tale. If it wasn't Orpheus and Eurydice, then he definitely loved all things underworldly. If you look at a lot of his books, they tend to fall on the side of horror. But he didn't like being labeled, and so he would often branch out into love stories as a way to not just fall under one category or one genre of a writer. There's also another famous movie based off of one of his books, which is also based on the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, and we'll be covering it in another episode. I'm almost thinking about having an entire episode on Richard Matheson himself. But for now, let's dive into What Dreams May Come. And to begin to understand What Dreams May Come, we got to go back to October of 1998 when it was released by Polygram Filmed Entertainment. So it's 1998. Bill Clinton is president in his second term. The Starr Report was just created to investigate Bill Clinton's inappropriate conduct with an intern. Grunge music is still alive and kicking, but ska and swing revival are just rearing their heads. On TV at this time, we're watching Friends, shows like Will and Grace, as well as the Charmed series are just getting started. In terms of kind of pop music, the Goo Goo Dolls released their famous song Iris, which, you know the song, it's now being played ad nauseum as an anthem for the 90s on Instagram Reels. And Green Day released Good Riddance, which is also better known as The Time of Your Life, or I Hope You Had the Time of Your Life, which is this beautiful kind of punk acoustic ballad whose purpose seemed to close the chapter on what was an incredibly interesting decade. So, 1998, a strange moment where we were already nostalgic for a decade that hadn't even ended yet. And at the center of it all was Robin Williams, someone we trusted to carry us through anything, even this. We wanted him to be in every movie and play every role, at least the ones that made us feel warm and special. So think Mrs. Doubtfire, or Good Will Hunting, Hook. His voice acting as the genie in Disney's Aladdin was legendary. And to this day, for those of us who were alive at that time, Robin Williams still shines as an enigma. And seeing him in this movie, for me at least, provoked some tough feelings when contemplating Robin's eventual future and his tragic death. But here he is in this movie, giving his absolute token Robin Williams performance, putting in all of his funny ad-libbing. And if I were to be completely honest, sometimes I'm not sure it really fits. But again, this was made in the 90s, and in the 90s, we all simply just loved Robin Williams. You got to understand this to understand this movie. And then you got Cuba Gooding Jr., an actor who started by doing what most actors do. They take any role they can get. Think Boys in the Hood, for example. And then by the late 90s, you couldn't typecast Cuba Gooding Jr. if you tried. He could play anything, and he did. He could play your proverbial tough guy and chill factor to a gay partner in As Good as It Gets, a soldier in Pearl Harbor, and a football player in Jerry Maguire. And here he is in What Dreams May Come, playing this spectral ghost roaming the afterlife. So we know that the movie, as we discussed, is based off of a novel. And in order to be able to fit all the content of the novel into a reduced time length that is a movie, of course changes are going to be made. That said, the actual layout and the presentation of the movie still appears incredibly novelesque. And I'm kind of tempted later on to maybe do an episode on the novel. As I understand it goes a lot more into the myth and the lore of the afterlife. But like the novel, the movie has this total abandonment of linear storytelling, and it favors constant flashbacks. There's so much to be understood in the movie's present moments by constantly needing to go back in the past to explain them. And the movie starts in a picturesque scene where our Orpheus, or Robin Williams, or his character Chris, meets his Eurydice, played by Annabella Sciorra, or Annie is her character's name. And he meets her while out sailing on a sailboat, and he's taking in the scenes atop a beautiful Swiss mountaintop. Already, this movie feels kind of mythic at this point. And Annie, she appears dressed in white. She first meets him speaking Italian, and she's got this beautiful long curly hair. And she almost appears like a goddess or nymph-like in her appearance. Now, again, in the 90s, we loved our celebrities, and celebrities could be put in any movie, and they could be allowed to give it their touch. But if there is, I would say, in my humble opinion, an absolute MVP to this movie, it's going to be Annabella Sciorra, who plays Annie. She just falls into the flow of the movie. She played her role as the story needed to be told, and not necessarily as she wanted. And in the 90s, I don't think that we appreciated this acting enough. So back to the movie, Chris meets Annie, and they fall in love, and they're very much in love. Then a few years later, we cut to a new scene that shows them older, still in love, and they got 2 kids now. Then we cut to another scene where he waves goodbye to his 2 kids as they drive off with a nanny. And we later find out that he never sees them again because they are hit by a trucker. And then we cut to a few years later, another scene where Chris then works as a pediatrician, his main job. And we see a scene of him helping a little girl who's experiencing migraines. And honestly, it feels at this moment like a scene right out of Patch Adams. It's feeling very much like a Robin Williams movie for sure. After work, Chris drives home and he sees a crash in a tunnel. And I can't help but say that already this tunnel is giving an underworldly vibe. And he goes to help an accident victim only to then get hit by a rogue car himself. So we cut very expeditiously to a near-death experience in a hospital where he's bandaged up. And then Albert, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., and he, kind of going back, was the doctor with whom Chris took residency as an up-and-coming doctor. Albert appears as this kind of ethereal, smudged, faded figure, and he takes Chris into what are the beginnings of the afterlife. So what is the afterlife and what dreams may come? For this movie and the book by Richard Matheson, I'd say it's about 80% based off of Judeo-Christian and Eastern metaphysical beliefs, and then the remaining 20% is about maybe like just creative invention for the story. But going back to the movie, Chris's place of post-mortem comfort as he's getting acquainted with the afterlife is living in his wife's beautiful naturescape paintings. And it's here that we're introduced to stunning visuals that I'm sure in the 90s probably presented as some seriously cool special effects. The colors are all very vivid and amazing. And it's also here that we're met with this critical scene in which, while living in his wife's paintings, Chris experiences in real time the newly painted edition that his wife just completes. And he also experiences when she, in a moment of grief and despair, destroys the paintings, and he sees its destruction. Albert explains that this can only occur when two people are truly soulmates. Amazing, right? When Albert must go to his daily after-death job of saving other souls, Chris is put in the care of Leona, who's played by Rosalind Chow. And she shows Chris the ability to create worlds and how souls prepare for reincarnation. She also reveals that she's actually Marie, his daughter. So even in death, identities blur, faces change, but the emotional ties, they definitely remain. When Albert comes back, he breaks the news that Annie, Chris's wife, has committed suicide, and that by her committing the act of committing suicide, her soul is now lost, beyond salvage. Chris is incredulous, and rightfully so. To see Robin Williams' character take total offense to the idea of suicide resulting in exile is painful. And I'll just stop there. For many authors and playwrights, when given the choice of a moral dilemma over a good story, they're going to choose a good story every time. So Chris is determined to go save his wife, and he convinces Albert to join him. Now this is where things get incredibly Orphic. They find themselves accompanied by the Tracker, played by none other than the great Max von Sydow. We also discover that Albert isn't Albert. We kind of knew this was coming, but rather his oldest son, Ian. Even the guides he trusts aren't who they seem to be, because in this world, or this afterlife, identity is less important than connection. But let's go back to the Tracker, or Max von Sydow. So this is actually a total Easter egg, if there ever was one. If you're familiar with the imagery of Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, which is coincidentally one of my absolute favorite movies of all time, then perhaps you've seen the young Max von Sydow as he washes up on this desolate beach, only to discover that he needs to engage a grim reaper or death character in a gentlemanly game of chess. So in the movie, What Dreams May Come, at some point they go down a river that goes down a dark corridor, which sounds familiar, kind of like the river Styx. And as they come into the other side, upon a large beachhead, which is very similar to the Seventh Seal, Max von Sydow, he washes ashore, and it looks almost just the same as the Seventh Seal movie. So this is what happens when you let movie nerds make movies. I love it. So they come across this large shipwreck, with the name of the ship being Cerberus, which is named after this large canine monster from Greek myth that guards the entrance to the underworld, ensuring that the dead don't go to the side of the living and that the living don't go to the side of the dead, that they all stay in their designated realms. Chris presses forth into this hellish underworld, and he falls into a chasm, which guides him directly to his wife, who appears to be stuck in a state of perpetual despair, which creates this dark, empty, decrepit household around her. Chris tries to be oh so careful, trying to be gentle in his approach towards his wife's dissonance. He tries not to overdo it. She clearly doesn't recognize him. Slowly, he also feels that his mind is melding to her world of despair, and he's losing his mind. Despite all of his efforts, when he realizes he can't get her back, he then goes back to the tracker, only to find out that the tracker is actually Albert, the doctor with whom he served his doctoral residency and served as a father figure to him. As the tracker, or Albert, kind of has this I told you so moment about Chris's wife, it's then that Chris resigns to stay with his wife, despite her state, and remain in this internal state of exile with her. As he goes back to her, and he goes ahead and lets his mind get lost to her despair, it's then that she appears to wake up, just in time to then take him out of this realm of despair, using her mind to then transport them both to her world of her naturescape paintings, where they reunite both them as well as their kids as a family, and together they plan their next reincarnated chapter. So we can make bold assumptions about the romanticism of a husband who is willing to exile himself into the depths of hell so he can be with his despaired wife. But perhaps one of the areas most overlooked in this film is the mental health aspect. There are repeated flashbacks in which Chris is visiting his committed or his institutionalized wife as she struggles in depression to cope with the loss of their children. At one point, Chris, when doing a visitation, even throws out the word divorce. So yes, despite them being soulmates, even the slings and arrows and the harsh realities of life can strain even the strongest bonds. Joseph Campbell is famous for saying, "The psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight." So what do you do when your partner is drowning? Do you jump in and let them pull you under as well? Mental health challenges in relationships is a significant reality we don't talk about enough. Why is it important? Because mental health challenges are very real for humans. It's just part of the human experience. Whether it's depression, obsession, anxiety, neurosis, psychosis, delusion or illusion, these are all very plausible holes that we can fall in. And whether we can get out or how we can get out of these holes are as individual as just us ourselves. Each one of us and our circumstances very much deserving of its own story. But what happens when you're okay, but it's your partner? By loving and supporting a neurotic partner and affirming their psychosis, do you become complicit? Or even worse, an enabler? Does it become contagious to the point it itself overtakes you? What Dreams May Come asks one of the hardest questions a relationship can face, and then, almost quietly, chooses not to answer it. It ever so gently takes a few paces back to ensure a grand story with a very, very happy ending. In 1998, most love stories and rom-coms all ended with happy endings. For those of us that grew up with this happy ending phenomena, well, we've been struggling ever since. Maybe that's why this story lingers, not because of what it resolves, but because of what it leaves unanswered. Hey, just a quick word. If you've listened this far into the episode, I just want to say a big thank you. This is a clearly new podcast, and we're just getting started. And so to anyone who can give or share some of their time listening to this, I just can't express my gratitude enough. I've also noticed that I've had some listeners from other countries, just in looking at demographic analytics data. I could be wrong. It could just be people listening with a VPN connection or something. But I noticed that I had a couple of downloads from Phnom Penh, Vietnam, I believe, which I just was really impressed with. And so I did a quick search to see if there were any lore or legends in Vietnam similar to Orpheus and Eurydice. And sure enough, I found one. And at some point, maybe, just maybe, I think I will cover that story in parallel to Orpheus and Eurydice, as it's just a beautiful story. And it shares a lot about the Vietnamese culture. But before we part ways tonight, a brief word. Stories of loss and descent have always been part of the human tradition, but if the themes in today's episode stirred something difficult in you, please know you don't have to carry that alone. In the United States, you can call or text 988, this suicide and crisis lifeline, to reach trained counselors at any time. They're there to listen. Even in the oldest stories, the journey into darkness is never meant to be taken alone. So please, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time on A Tale Oft Told. Okay, it's that time where I will announce our next featured film. Our next Orphic movie is going to be, wait for it, Vertigo. That's right, Vertigo. An absolute classic. Alfred Hitchcock at his best. A movie starring Jimmy Stewart. I'm really looking forward to this one. We'll see you next time.